Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. We are an international community that is dedicated to improving the way that the financial services sector works. Our mission is to promote ongoing reform of the finance sector so that it serves society better. And our vision is to build a highly respected, international, influential institution that helps to ensure that consumers are treated fairly by the finance industry. We operate through many different groups and we have many different kinds of activities, and much of our work centers around what we call the 12 finance development goals. The 12 finance development goals, or FDGs, are all about the 12 topics that we think really matter. These are the topics which, if they were all sorted out, would result in the finance sector being the honourable, noble, transparent, truthful and trustworthy sector that we need and want it to be. And one of those 12 very important finance development goals is all about leadership. We believe passionately that there is tremendous scope to improve the quality and the sense of authenticity around leadership within financial services. It's a very big and important topic for us. That's why we're dedicating quite a bit of our attention to it. And in relation to this very important topic of leadership, we figured one of the best things we could possibly do would be to reach out to people that we know have a very well-earned reputation for being enlightened financial services leaders. And we're undertaking video interviews of those sorts of individuals, those special sorts of individuals, and this video is all about that. I'm joined today by my colleague Deborah Henderson, who is an exemplary consultant and coach in the leadership in financial services space. Deborah runs the Centre for Inspired Leadership, which is exactly what it's all about. And I'm going to pass over to Deborah now, who's going to introduce herself and then today's guest. Deborah, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And thank you for all you have done to found TTF, or Transparency Task Force, and all the incredible dedication you do to create a global mission-focused enterprise. It's remarkable. And I'm honored to be an ambassador of the Transparency Task Force. Thank you to you. And our guest today, Marcos Eguiguren, is in fact also a Transparency Task Force ambassador. You mentioned, yes, that I am running Center for Inspired Leadership, and we do focus on supporting leaders in financial services. And my own background is 16 years as an investment banker, first in New York and then in London. And I'd say it's been 16 years of total time in financial services, corporate finance, and institutional equity sales. And it's been now about 22 years as a leadership coach consultant, focusing primarily in the last 10 years on leaders in financial services. I'm delighted to be involved in this enterprise or initiative of interviewing selected leaders that we feel are, exactly as you said, Andy, role models for the sector, both enlightened leaders having gone through their own path to discover what is happening in the finance sector and what is needed, and authentic leaders. And I cannot think of a better leader example that we've got to interview with us today, dear Marcos, and I thank you for being with us. Marcos is, how to give in a snapshot, a wonderful background description of the richness that he represents. He is based in Barcelona at present. He is of a Basque father and a Catalan mother. His education is as an economist with both a Bachelor of Art, a BA and a PhD in business administration. I'll share much of the richness of his background purposeful for this interview, but I'd like you to also know that he is a husband, father, grandfather, musician, sportsman on the side. And now when I share the rest of his activities, you'll begin to wonder how he fits it all in. Marcos is today professor at 2 universities in Barcelona, and he is partner of the Now Partners, which I'd love you to share a little more with us, Marcos, as to what the Now Partners is doing in regenerative economy with a number of business leaders. Feels very, very interesting. And prior to this, Marcos has a whole background in finance as a banker, as a leader of bankers, and at one point as being 5 years the head of the Global Alliance for Banking and Values. We are delighted, Marcos, that you are with us. In your whole career from banking to strategic consulting and then back again, dipping in, there have been many opportunities where you've been able to see what you've loved about banking and then what didn't work for you. And what I sense is your mission to bring values to the sector, as well as what Andy's spoken to, appropriate leadership. And I can see you doing that as well through all of your teachings right now. So I'd love to weave much of this in and look forward to the richness of your background that you can share with us. Is there anything more you'd like to share on your background before we delve into some of the questions that would be helpful for our audience?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Debbie, for the introduction, and thank you very much to Andy and to the Transparency Task Force. I'm very honored also to be an ambassador. And to be honest, I feel that we definitely need the role of the TTF, the Transparency Task Force, pretty much in these moments of uncertainty, because, well, we all know that in the crisis we all suffering starting 2007, 2008, it was very much about finance being at the center of the origin of that crisis. And well, banks were amongst the ones to be blamed, by the way. And this is not exactly what is happening today with this COVID-19 crisis that's starting to be obvious all over. I will be very glad if banks and finance could be part of a solution and not part of the problem, but it depends on all of us and also on the CEOs and leaders in the banking industry to show that this is possible. And for that purpose, transparency is key. So thank you, Andy, for your work on that topic. But yeah, let me go back to my sort of history because it's pretty much quite a unique sort of profile, because I mean, I started as a banker when I was very young in 1976. I was, 16 years old. It was the old times, by the way. I mean, and I was working at a bank while I was, when I went to college, something which today would be almost impossible, I would say, but it was possible at that time. And I spent some years at a very well-known bank in Spain. But after some time, I got bored. I thought, well, it looks like I cannot, learn more in banking. So I need to try something else. And so I left banking and then went to consulting. I was still pretty young. And the consulting firm I was working in was obviously around banking and finance and so on and so forth. And I work in Madrid, but then also in the USA. And I learned a few more things, but basically focus on banking. So I learned how to look at banking from an outside perspective, not from an inside perspective, so that I could learn a few other things. Then I sort of went back to banking again in Spain and then in London. And after also a few years, I got bored again. So said, gosh, I need to sort of leave banking and look at banking again from outside. And that was the time when I sort of left banking for the second time. And then I started to shift my mind. That was the time in which I started with my PhD, and I did some investigation about banking. So I started to mix academia with finance and banking. And also when I started a company that was the seed of what today is Triodos Bank in Spain. So I also helped to co-found an ethical bank in our country. And this sort of mix between academia, consulting, banking, and entrepreneurship has always been part of my roots. And basically, that's probably the reason why today I am a professor of business administration at the Barcelona School of Management. And I have the task of creating an international research center on ethics in business and finance. And I'm also a partner at Now Partners to try to really push banking and finance towards the values-based scheme. So in a nutshell, that's where I am and why this sort of unique combination of perspective, but always around finance and mostly around finance.
Marcos, I feel so lucky to be able to speak with you. It's rare to have this wonderful potpourri or combination outside look at finance, feeling that you got bored while you were in it. And I want to explore the word bored in a moment as to what it was that was really speaking to you, because I think many bankers will identify with, if we expand that word. I'm going to press pause because I've got a bigger picture question first. And then your ability to be able to go, and how do I teach what I've now observed and how I've practiced it? It's just a wonderful combination for us to speak to. So Andy, as you know, has spoken to the whole question of trust and transparency. You've spoken to the importance of this now in COVID times, that banking would be part of the solution if we look at this. I'd be curious, when you put on your big picture hat, what do you feel is at the root cause of many of these elements of trust issues in financial services?
Well, I mean, if I revisit what has been written in the past 10 to 12 years around the financial crisis and the role of finance in that crisis, we discovered many times that people and experts and colleagues in academia and others, they refer basically to greed as a very deep root of the role of finance in that crisis. And obviously it's what causes the lack of reputation today. But I'm not that convinced, you know. I think this is only a one dimension of the issue, because you find greed all over. I mean, unfortunately, it's not a matter of, no, only bankers or only, financiers are the one who show greed. This is just not true. And I cannot go into other industries because, some people might feel uncomfortable, but we all know that. I mean, it's not a matter of that. I think that unfortunately, greed is still something that is told too much in our culture and in current capitalism. And of course, it has to change. But I feel that what was very peculiar of finance during the crisis, and probably that's what it's a real root case of this lack of reputation today, is clearly tribalism. I feel that the financiers and bankers have behaved as a tribe, clearly as a tribe, for years. And I mean, the example is, well, you all know the city, and you, Debbie, you have worked in the city, and Andy has worked in the city too, and you know how it works. You travel in your offices, and then you get you finish at whatever the time, and then you go to a pub. Well, not now with COVID, but you normally go to a pub, and you sit down with your colleagues, have a couple of pints, and you keep on talking the same jargon and around the same topics and with the same focus that you have been sort of dealing with the whole day and even in the weekends. So at the end of the day, you build such a kind of a world in a very strong shell, which is not real. It's not reality. You sort of build kind of a parallel world. I think the tribalism has been, you know, pretty damaging in the financial industry. And this, I mean when saying that I feel that bankers should really look outside. One of the things that has happened is that bankers have lost their essence. And the essence in banking and finance was looking outside, looking to the real economy, sitting down with the client, understanding the client, trying to see how you can help that company or that individual through finance. And I think that we have changed that, and we have been looking inside ourselves too much. So for me, tribalism is really a matter of, or one of the big problems that has contaminated the finance in the past years, and the a horrible solution for that is that governments believe that the only way of solving any problem in finance is by regulation. So they regulate more and more and more and more. But they do not see that they are really building a very, very bad regulation. What we have today is quite the wrong regulation. It's about process, it's about solvency, it's about liquidity, it's about bureaucratic consumer protection, but it's not what we need. It's not about incentives, it's not about governance, it's not about transparency, or at least not enough. So the only thing that we are doing is that with the current regulation, we are doing finance even more complex than it was. And when you have too complex an industry, it's much more difficult to make it transparent. So we are in a pretty peculiar situation. I feel that financial institutions are trapped in a jail, and the jail has 4 walls. One is lack of reputation. The second wall is the appearance of new digital players, and everyone is looking at that. Oh my God, what are we gonna do for that? The third wall is the long period of low interest rates, which is affecting many countries in the world. And the fourth wall of the jail is a heavy regulation. We need to find ways to escape that jail. And I think that the first one is recovering reputation.
Wow. So first, thank you. I think your naming of the tribalism of the sector is quite profound when we think about how do tribes operate? Why do tribes operate? How do tribes protect themselves? What do tribes feel threatened by? And ultimately, yes, how do tribes compete with other tribes? But the sense of walls that you've created as in jail is almost as if that's what the tribalism has also created, such that the sector is not looking, or leaders are not looking as much as they need to the external world, and yet the external world has always depended on the sector as the pillars of support. So it's a really fascinating conundrum that we've got ourselves, that we've created.
That's what I believe. I feel that it's basically partially it's our fault. We have let it happen. And we have let it happen just by behaving in a tribal way, and just by not looking enough outside of the box and sitting down with the clients the healthy way we should have always sit down with the client. That's not happened, and we have built our own walls. Now we need to escape from them.
Well, I feel there's a whole other study that would be interesting to look at what happens for tribes, and when do tribes begin to being a tribe is no longer healthy for itself. We're here today looking at the subject of leadership as a really key component part that Andy has identified, others have identified, as a way of getting out of this jail, as you call it. We could call it out of the confines and the destructive nature of the tribalism. And you've identified one of the walls, of the key walls, is loss of reputation, and what that needs to be addressed. And maybe if that was addressed at the outset, it might help. It won't help the interest rates element of the wall, but it could help some of the other elements regarding regulation. Would you like to speak a little bit more, because you've your whole background now seems to be so geared to leadership in financial services. Where and how do you feel the key elements of leadership needs to be? What works well within leaders now in the finance sector, and what really is not working well? That's part and parcel of this, or that could address one of those.
Well, obviously, yeah, I strongly feel that we are, I mean, financial institutions, of course, it's not exactly the same for all of them, and probably not exactly the same in all sub-sectors within the financial industry, but up to an extent, they're all trapped in this jail. And leadership should and must play a role in trying to escape out of that. And there's no other way. I mean, if you ask me, oh, but what can we do? Can we change regulation, or can we do this, or can we do that? And of course, regulators should play their role and should really reconsider what they do, but that's a different thing. But from a financial institution perspective, the only way to shift things is to have the right leaders and have the right leadership. So, and having the right leadership is not just having, you know, the greatest banker on earth and, you know, the most sophisticated banker trained at Harvard or, you know, London School of Economics or whatever. I think we need a different banker, a different kind of banker. I really believe that we need to go back to basics in a while, up to a certain extent. And this means having a banker that is really a human being, somebody who is able to think out of the box, to consider banking and finance in its essence, not as a money-making machine, which is, I think, one of the biggest mistakes we can make. And I think that if we have enough leaders that really reconsider banking, make a reinterpretation of finance, and leave their companies from this profound humanistic perspective, revisiting the essence of the role of finance and restructuring the whole financial institutions from that perspective, I feel that in a few years, it cannot be done overnight, but we will see a reflourishment of finance and probably an improvement of the reputation of banks and all other financial institutions. But we need a different leaders, much more human, much closer to the essence of finance.
Now, you've observed from your in-out perspective what happens to yourself in finance and what has happened to other leaders in finance. And I'm curious how you envisage that this shift in leadership might happen to become more humanistic. You may be teaching it in business schools yourself now, and we're not all lucky enough to be able to be your students unless we spread this interview widely. So I really want to catch this essence from you. How do we support leaders who are currently, we could look at those coming into the sector, but those that are currently leading, to be able to recognize this need for the human element and to reframe the role of finance? What is it going to take? Will it take another crash?
Yeah.
Or are you seeing, do you have hope because you see other leaders coming together to be able to educate other leaders and be role models? Or how is it going to work?
Well, I mean, hopefully it's not because there is another crisis. It will be too painful. But I feel that there are things that can be done in order to really promote the different sort of people become leaders in the financial industry. Of course, the universities and business schools, we can do a lot in trying to promote a certain way of leadership. Just as an example, at the Barcelona School of Management, we have been working for quite a long time in sort of redesigning our programs so that they are not only programs about just an MBA or just an MSc in finance or whatever, but all our programs have a deep dive in culture, in corporate philosophy, in ethical conversations about what is the role of I mean, not only banking and finance, but other industries. So I feel that business schools, we can do a lot, and we're doing a lot, and we still can do more. So there's something we can do from business schools to prepare new leaders so that they really are more aware and more open to a different way of looking at businesses. But a second thing that can change, and now let me go back to regulators again. I mean, I said a few things which were not very positive about regulation. I do not feel that the current regulation is going to save us from any new crisis. It will sort of perhaps, make it a little bit more acceptable, but it will not save us because they are not going into the essence of the problems. And the essence of the problems have to be with governance and with the profile of the right leaders. That's what it's all about. And there's a lot that we can do also to have the right leaders from a governance perspective of financial institutions and also from a regulator perspective. I really believe that investors, shareholders in the financial industry should be much more aware of the need of having pretty and deeply ethical leaders. They should be aware of that. If they keep on trying to find the guy or the girl who just, made up so many billions or millions of money in that other bank in the other corner of the world, and we try to hire that person, bring it to our financial institutions, and ask him or her to just continue making money, I think that's a big mistake, a big mistake. We need to find those persons who are, again, genuinely human. And of course, they have to be bankers. I'm not saying they don't, but genuinely human, people who can make an interpretation of the business in a different way. People who are used to, work with a much longer term horizon than today. And that's something that governance, shareholders, board of directors should be very much aware of. They need to work from that perspective. Sometimes it's not easy because also at board of directors level, we don't have the right culture. And that's the moment in which regulators and directors, non-executive directors, could partner. Because if we redefine regulation deeply, from a perspective of the regulators incentivizing companies, financial institutions, especially boards, to have the right people at the, as CEOs or CFOs or whatever, really pushing, really taking care of that. I think that we would build a quick and profound change. I just remember John Laker, who was the former governor of the central bank in Australia. I told to him last year in Vancouver during a conference of the Global Alliance for Banking and Values, and I remember him saying, well, the best ally of a regulator is a good board. And I truly believe that that's true.
Okay, so I'm hearing several pincer movements. We can look at education, we can look at regulation, we can look at the asset managers or shareholders ultimately investing in banks. And that pincer movement, so to speak, could then start to speak to addressing the questions of board, governance, management, and a knowing of the need for the human banker.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what progress you have seen or what examples you have seen where this has worked, that you could speak to any case studies in your GABV role where you've been looking at the collective, because this feels as if it needs a full collaboration of multiple subsectors almost to be able to support this critical element for society. And I'm just curious what you have seen that has worked that you could give us some sense of hope.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. It's a matter of cooperation. And again, we find this eternal dilemma between competition and cooperation. It looks like in our world that competition is, the key element, which, yeah, it's real sometimes. But I mean, I think that the fact that companies compete amongst themselves does not prevent them to cooperate in some instances, and that's perhaps one of the examples. I could mention a few examples, and especially, as you can imagine, in the Global Alliance for Banking and Values that I had been leading for, well, 2-3 months ago, for around 6 years. There were quite many banks, I could probably mention all of them, but quite many banks that have like a very good balance between the essence of their shareholders, what kind of shareholders they were looking for, with the governance model of the bank, and also the role this bank had with regulators. And we could perhaps mention the many cases of cooperative banks that are part of the alliance and that decided from the very beginning that they would not have like normal shareholders, or they would not get public because they believe that they would be able to grow sufficiently, even if they were a cooperative. And some of the banks are a great example of that. I can think of Van City Credit Union in British Columbia and Canada, or some of our colleagues in Scandinavia or in Germany with GLS Bank and others. So you can really grow significantly while being a cooperative. But other banks in the alliance decided not to use a cooperative ownership model and just have like a commercial model with independent shareholders, and even some of them went public. But there was something that was similar in all cases, and it's that the core shareholders were almost 80-90% patient shareholders, mission-driven shareholders. So investment actors who understood that we need a different way of approaching shareholding in finance and banking. But it's doable. And then you also saw in many of those banks a different approach to governance, with a very strict distinction between the non-executive board of directors and the executive board of directors, very strict rules in terms of the separation of both bodies. Also, very clear ways of choosing the right chief executive, CEO, CFO, CTO, whatever. So yeah, there are quite a few examples. I mean, a very interesting example of a governance system which is peculiar is the case of Triodos Bank, which is, as you probably know, a Dutch bank, but also with operations in other countries like the UK, Belgium, Germany, Spain, and then an investment management firm. They have a very peculiar governance system with a foundation, a supervisory board, and as an executive board. And they sort of act in an intertwined way, trying to protect the culture of the bank while keeping the bank independent and keeping the good health in governance and the quality of top management. So yeah, and there are many other examples.
What I'm hearing from you is that it feels as if in the ideal world, we'll have a really strong sense of alignment, of that sense of mission, looking out for society, what's good for society at the ownership level, at the board level, at the executive level, and then ultimately encompassed with the regulatory level. So that as money is flowing through, given that this is a sector where money is the product, money is the service, risk is that we can collapse it to becoming money is the purpose. And when we're able to rejig that and have alignment in all the stakeholders that are surrounding the bank, that ultimately money is a bottom line, but it's to deliver a purpose that is bigger than the bank itself in terms of its service, that's what would support alignment all the way through and allow the leader to become the human leader because they're supported by all the entities, all the stakeholders with that same sense of mission. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, precisely. The role of money in finance is probably the reason why finance, if you compare it with any other industry, is so peculiar. Because if you are a pharma company, or you're a food company, or a tourist company, or an airline, your product is a different thing. You know, it's something tangible, it's a service. But when you're a financial institution, money is your product. And then there is a certain tendency to really, you know, misunderstand what it's all about. Because at the end of the day, unfortunately, many leaders believe that money is not just the means, but it's the ends in itself. And that's not at all true. I mean, money is only a means, and we financiers and bankers use it to, you know, make the life of other people better, and to allow companies to thrive. That's what it's all about.
I feel this is an interesting moment to then start zeroing in a little bit on personal leadership, because what you're referencing, it seems to me, is what is the individual leader's relationship with money. Or if money becomes a personal driver for them, it's hard for them to lead from the sense of mission and purpose in society. And do we properly spend that time in education of leaders to look at their personal relationship with money, especially when they're going straight into the den of the tribe that's called the money tribe, and in referencing you, so we could create our own jail around us in a blinkered, blind fashion if we're not aware of what our own relationship with money is. And I'm curious about your journey, having gone into banking very young as you did, recognizing the word you used was bored. I got bored. And I heard, because the word bored in English is beautiful, you tend to think about it being intellectually boring. And there was a part of me, given your journey, that feels as that if it was more than intellectually boring, it didn't fill your soul's calling, if you'll allow me to use that language, and it felt confining. And so you needed to step out, refine some element and part of yourself, and then come back in. Is that a fair description?
I think so. I think you did.
Would you like to amplify on that?
Yeah, I think you described it pretty well, because it's, when I said bored, I really meant bored, you know? I really meant bored. It was, especially in my first sort of phase in banking, you know, late 70s or early 80s, and I decided to leave banking at around 88 or 89, I just forgot. But it was because it was intellectually boring, but also from a, you know, personal realization perspective, I thought that something was missing. It was not that I did not like banking up to an extent, but that I thought it was time to have a different perspective. Otherwise, I would be trapped for life in the tribe of bankers. So, and it has been like that in all my career. So the first time I decided to leave banking, it was because the bank I was in went into a merge with another bank. I was not convinced at all that the merge was positive for society, not even for the bankers working in the bank. So I just thought, I think it's time to go. And I also had the intention of understanding much better from outside how finance worked. So I did it. And then, you know, the next time that it happened to me after, you know, some years in consulting and academia, I went to banking again. I work in Spain and also in the city of London. Then for different reasons, I spent some time at a treasury desk, sort of dealing with derivatives for Southern Europe. It was the times in which we still had the Spanish peseta and the French franc, the Italian lira, and all those things. And believe me, I really understood how it worked. I was one of those guys who was able to, you know, approximately calculate the premium of an option, or, you know, the way a swap operate, etc., etc. But after a few months, I saw that something was deeply wrong with that, because I mean, my understanding is that a derivative is something that can be used helpfully as a hedging mechanism, and that's nothing I have to say about that. It's great. But then I started seeing clients of the bank and companies and the bank itself asking the treasury desk to try to build special, instruments that were not actually hedging instruments, but really speculative instruments. And I felt very uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. I mean, of course I did it. I couldn't say no. But I felt very uncomfortable because I had that understanding that told me it was looks like, somebody whispering in my mind at night saying, this is not the right thing to do. This is, this is not healthy. I mean, it does not add anything to society. I mean, of course, you hear from your bosses and so no, but that's great because that's liquidity to the market and blah, blah, blah. But when I was alone with myself at night, I said, what the hell are you saying with liquidity to the market? That's not true. That's another way of trying to get the last cent. So I decided to just leave banking again. So
Marcos, this is really interesting though, because when we speak about, you spoke about tribe, you spoke about jail, and we could almost say that in that particular tribe, there's a certain addictive element of money. Many
absolutely.
It's difficult to leave.
You make a lot of money in some roles.
It feeds our sense of self-esteem, status, freedom, power, authority, whatever. But and that will feed in any case for many other industries, but this industry is specific and we're surrounded by it. I think it's really key for our audience to hear the elements that you had to listen to that inner voice in order to feel right in yourself, that you could take the move that you could take the decision to move. You were, at that time, I'm assuming, married with children.
Yeah.
That have all the natural costs that are associated with that.
Yeah.
All
big costs, by the way.
All the social benefits that are associated with working in banking that feed into wanting to keep the same structure or tribe or whatever around. What is it that you know about yourself that might be useful to share for other leaders to invite them to pay attention to that voice, or that invited you to pay attention to that voice and have enough knowing that it was time to jump off? Because many, I think, find that difficult to do.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the most important thing is that you need to be able to think out of the box continuously. And I'm not saying that that's only something that should happen to financiers or bankers. No, not really. I think this is applicable, it can be applicable to any other industry, to politicians, to many areas in life today. But if you're not able to think out of the box, you will never escape that jail, because the tribe, you're a member of the tribe and you're a team member of the tribe, and the tribe protects you, of course. I mean, a tribe has a positive role also, but the tribe is also a jail. So if and then you find a balance. I'm a member of a tribe. I'm very happy with that. The tribe is protecting me, but I have to behave in a way that is according to what the tribe expects from me. And then you have to continuously analyze where you are in this balance, because as long as this protection of the tribe is not built at the price of you losing your soul and your principles, that's fine. But if a moment comes in which to have this protection of the tribe, you need to really work against some deep principles or deep values that you have. Or even if you don't have to do that, but the tribe is sort of pushing you to repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat again, once and again, the same kind of pattern without empowering you to be creative, then you need to reconsider. So it's a matter of this dilemma. It's a dilemma with your principles and dilemma with your creativity. And the very first moment you start to feel uncomfortable, you need to revisit your relationship with the tribe. And sometimes you need to have courage. If the conclusion is I need to leave the tribe, you need to have the courage to do it. But if the conclusion is I need to leave the tribe, but the protection that the tribe offers you is too important for you, and at the end you decide not to leave the tribe, you will pay the price sooner or later.
How does that manifest, paying the price?
Well, paying the price is if you keep on working in a field and in an area in which you have a real divide between what you do and what you feel it's the right thing to do, at the end of the day, you will be unhappy. You will have problems at home. You will have problems with your friends. And at the end of the day, you will not perform adequately in your job. And ultimately, you might even be fired. So you will lose the tribe anyway. So if you see the symptoms, you'd rather be courageous and fair to yourselves and look for other fields.
This is a really interesting point. At what point do we start to hear the message from the soul and our principles that this is not right, and be able to take that line, draw the line in the sand? Now, you've been able to do this very effectively by listening to that voice and choosing to leave, find another means to be able to look at banking as either a professor or as a consultant, and then come back in. And my sense is when you've come back in, unless the role was right for you, you left again. But you were able to come back in several times and find the right role where you could make a difference as a leader with your principles, with your values, and name what was needed in order to guide. Have you envisaged a situation in which somebody could, as a leader, maybe you want to share with us a little bit your own observations of how it's possible to come in as a leader, or is it possible to work one's way up as a leader and make the shifts of the culture of the organization based on your principles and knowing? I'm curious about what you discovered was needed to do that, and whether we need to go out and back in, or whether we could start making shifts from within.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I should mention is that it's not only listening to your inner voice that says, perhaps this is not what you should be doing. And of course, you listen to your voice. But I mean, normally life is a little bit more mundane, and you also listen to other people. So by the time that I was starting to get worried about that phase in banking, I was sitting now with some colleagues who were actually also worried about banking. So I was sitting now with a few members of the tribe that were not very happy with the tribe, and spoke to them about what's the problem, what's happening, how do you see the situation, what is the kind of sort of profile that you see in a different sort of financial industry. And then by talking to other colleagues, you very quickly start to envision a new future and a different way of looking at finance. And by the way, what happened at that time is that with one or two of those colleagues, we created a company that became, years later, the operations of Triodos Bank in Spain. So it's basically, I think I have to give my colleagues, especially one of them, the tribute of also, helping me waking up a little bit to that, you know. But having said so, then when you're back into the industry from another perspective and trying to lead a different set of financial institution, there are some things that I feel are absolutely needed to lead a financial institutions in a healthy way. I wouldn't say in a highly performing way, because I prefer to say in a healthy way, because I'm absolutely convinced, and it's not only my conviction, it's also something that has been demonstrated by quite a few academic research, that a healthy company performs better. So I prefer to say that I would love to lead a healthy financial institution, because if it's healthy, it will perform appropriately. So it's more a consequence. And I feel that the key things you need to have is first of all to have a clear vision. What are you heading to? And the point when you strictly focus in money as a measurement of your success is that there is not a vision. Your vision is instrumental. Debbie, if you look at any, business plan that has just been like published by many of the financial institutions in Europe, large banks, other companies, and you look at the, executive summary, I mean, is there really a vision in some of them? I've been looking at a few of them in the past few months. And I don't see any vision. The only vision is, well, we want to be stronger in this market segment, and we want to increase the return on equity in that area, or the return on assets in mortgages has to be this and that, and then our communication with clients. But what is the vision? That's not a vision. And that's the point. What the leader has always money and return and shareholders value as the measurement, they lose the vision. So again, I think that vision is key, but a vision emanated from a humanistic perspective. What is the role of my financial institution in this market? What do we want to contribute, and why? It's not only the what, it's the why. Why we want to do this in this market. So for me, vision is absolutely key. The second thing is, and it's something you have heard me say already in this conversation, it's you need to think out of the box constantly. I mean, because if you do not think out of the box, you will repeat again the old tribal vices of financial institutions in your institution. So you need to be perhaps different, just different. Just think out of the box. Let's see what works. And even if something stupid works, if it works, it's probably not so stupid. So a clear vision linked to the why are we here, thinking out of the box, and then quite a few things that have to do with the team. In finances, unfortunately, and yeah, that's perhaps a matter of history. Regulation does not help, but we are in an industry in which there is not too much empowerment, and I feel that empowerment is key. It's not that the leadership team has a clear vision, but then nobody else is really sort of linked to that, is really aligned with that. I feel that empowerment, a leadership team that really empowers the co-workers, the middle management, that really make them, accept these responsibilities. It's not the vision of the leaders, it's the vision of the financial institution. This is key. Empowerment for me is absolutely key. And it's very difficult in finance, by the way. It's not easy. I understand that. But I think that we need to make an effort. And this empowerment does not mean that if there is something wrong, the responsibility is yours. That's the big problem of being a CEO. If you're a CEO, you know that when something is wrong, the problem will be on your table the very first minute. And nobody else is going to help you. Not even the board, by the way. Not even the board. So empowering people is a big responsibility, because you have to do it at the same time that accepting that if something goes wrong, even if it's something that has done outside of your scope, the responsibility is yours and you have to accept it. You need to protect your team, because if you don't protect them, you will lose the vision. And the last thing I would say is you need to acknowledge, the success are everyone's successes. It is not your success, which is something that has not been too traditional in the financial industries. We have been, unfortunately, in an industry in which egos have been huge. And I think that egos are very dangerous. But yeah.
Okay, so let's build on this last piece. Egos are very dangerous. Egos that are disconnected from vision, disconnected from principles, disconnected from the sense of empowerment or acknowledging others, become indeed perpetuating the tribe that stays elitist and is not thinking out of the box and is self-protecting, blame even, not acknowledging others. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But even an ego, because I mean, from that perspective, we could say there are good egos and bad egos, right?
Healthy egos and not healthy egos.
Okay, let's call it that way. Healthy egos and not healthy egos. That's true. But even healthy egos might be dangerous in the longer run, unless you are absolutely self-aware of that. I mean, we all have egos. You cannot be a CEO if you don't have a certain ego. That's the plain truth. But you need to be aware of your limitations, and you need to be aware that the only way you can use your ego is if it's healthy. And if something happens and it's not that healthy, or there's an element or whatever that makes you think, that's not exactly what I really wanted to do, you need to immediately reconsider what you're doing. So even healthy egos should be very, very aware of their limitations.
So this becomes quite the conundrum then that we've got, because we have leaders in the finance sector. Have you seen or witnessed that leaders in the finance sector are taken through regular leadership development, self-awareness programs?
Yeah, normally so, yeah.
Yeah. And my question is whether those that are at the top now that are going to be needing to make the key decisions about the culture, whether we're feeling that is so. My curiosity, that's part one to the question, and part two would be your comment about the vision seems again key to the board of directors and the shareholders.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I am curious, as you have outlined, that healthy cultures give better performance. Are you aware of whether shareholders hold that to be true and know that to be true? And is there enough information, proof that is so in this sector?
There is enough information about that, but I think there's also still a kind of very deep thought that in order to perform better, you need to focus on business as usual. So in spite of the growing sort of evidences that healthy companies or healthier managed companies normally perform better, it's still not really arriving to certain tables. So we are now I think we're in a moment of change. We're in a moment of change because the Global Alliance for Banking and Values has been, by the way, conducting all kind of research about this topic. And one of the research that we have been doing for years, since 2013 or 2012, if I'm not wrong, is a research that we call Real Economy, Real Returns, in which we compare the financial performance in terms of profitability and solvency and liquidity and growth and so on of the banks that belong to the Global Alliance, and we compare it with the financial performance of the too big to fail banks, the globally systemically important financial institutions. So we have been doing this for years. And whoever wants to have a look at this report, you can download it freely from the web of Global Alliance. And what we have discovered since moment zero is that prior to the crisis, during the crisis, after the crisis, the banks of the Global Alliance have been performing better in all fields. They have been more solvent. They have had better liquidity. The growth is much better, and even from a profitability perspective, their profitability has been slightly higher than the one of the systemic banks, with a difference. And the difference is that the volatility of profits is very minor in values-based bank if you compare it to mainstream systemic banks. But it's not only this research that the Global Alliance has been conducted for years. There's also lots of external evidences. There is a well-known research that was done by George Serafin at Harvard about industries and companies in different industries that had very clear policies about sustainability and ESG decision-making process that shows again that companies that are driven in a healthier way and that have a healthy governance perform better. The same research, also using your Serafin set of methodology, was used with banking a year ago, with the participation of the European Investment Bank, Deloitte, and also the Global Alliance for Banking and Values. And we did exactly the same that George Serafin did with many industries a few years ago. We did it with banking. And we sort of took the 100 bigger banks and we sort of analyzed the portfolios, and we sort of separated the parts of the portfolio that were sort of analyzed through ESG criteria. We separated it from the other parts of the portfolio which ESG criteria were not used. And again, the performance of this sort of, let me call it, sustainable part of the portfolio was much higher than the other one. Which means at the end that, yes, there is sufficient evidence, and there are other researchers from that goes into that area. So there is sufficient evidence, but you see, and we have seen this recently, that sort of some private equity funds and some big investment funds are still sort of, showing lots of concern, lots of doubts about the resiliency of companies that are governed in a much healthier way or in a much more sustainable way. So still mainstream investors, not all of them, but still quite a few of them are thinking that, well, we need to manage companies as we have always managed the companies. So profit is the key, money is the master, and then we'll see. I feel they are fully wrong, but this dilemma is still on the table. We still need to work around that.
Now, I'm curious, dear Marcos, do you include those asset managers who might, private equity, otherwise, who might think that way? Do you include them in the tribe?
Of course they are.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, there are a few sub-tribes, obviously, within the big tribe, but they're obviously part of the tribe, no doubts.
Yes. And they are having more and more influence overall.
They're having more influence overall, that's true, because they're also very influential with governments and administration. They still administer trillions of money. So yeah, it's still a concern, but I also see that something is changing. And in spite of what I said, I see that a few of them are starting to rethink things. A few of them are starting to rethink things. It's not enough. We need more people. But a few are starting to say, well, perhaps there's something we are not seeing and we should see. And we need more of them. We need more of them, because I mean, if we only have like, you know, just pick, for instance, the 4 or 5 largest private equity firms in the world, and we had only two of them, with the leaders reconsidering the way they look at their investments and the way they look at profitability and the way they look at the profile and focus of the companies they would love to invest, only 2 of them, it would have spread like a virus. A positive virus this time, by the way.
Well, therein lies what can be the positive viruses. So I'm hearing there's something I'd like to just play on as we're coming to a summary of this, is your comment is we need to be focused on out of the box thinking. It feels as if it's out of the traditional, out of the tribe, out of the current way of operating, connected with values and principles and our moral compass, our soul's basis of internal self-awareness.
That's a good summary.
And at the same time, I'm hearing that we've got a challenge at the moment of many of the shareholder bases, of which they're changing, but maybe not at the speed that we need, because we need that sense of alignment with them. It's making me wonder whether the key questions to be able to support awareness at the shareholder level, because I'm hearing a difference almost between your out of the box, I'm going to call it creative thinking, and our extractive economy. How much money can I make from this investment? And then how does my investment serve that entity / bank or otherwise to grow and become what it's meant to grow in serving society? But if we're at this extractive creative dilemma at the moment, you're a leader in this field of supporting other leaders to be able to look at this as a professor, as an author, as a speaker, as a partner in Now Partners, for instance, creating B Corps. What's your sense about how we could spread this insight in a virus way, a positive virus way? What forms of collaboration could be developed for this? I'm just seeing, and Andy will ask you a couple of questions linked with this in a moment when I pass back to him, but I'm just curious what leaves you with hope at this juncture.
Yeah, well, I think there's plenty of things that can be done, and perhaps the example of again, the banks of the Global Alliance for Banking and Values is a good example. That there are things that can be done to really push shareholders and investors to make a reflection on what is important in life. And it does not mean that their investment doesn't have to be profitable. Of course not. It's a matter of priorities. I think that it's, we also at the Global Alliance for Banking and Values, we have something that is very much needed in these moments of uncertainty, and especially for financial institutions that want to follow their moral compass as a source for positive impact, but also for financial performance. And is that what we have created for years, which is that the Global Alliance for Banking and Values was a club of CEOs and leaders. Basically, then we did many other things for the banks, and we sort of gave them quite a few services, but the most important thing, the most important element of the Global Alliance is that it is a club of CEOs. Because at the end of the day, when you have like a banker or a financier who is the CEO of a bank that is following this moral compass, and that perhaps in some cases has challenges with the board. This is not unusual, by the way. Or has difficult relationship with, you know, some shareholders that are like showing their concern because the focus of the bank is not fully on financial performance, but it considers financial performance of a consequence of other things. Then to have this club of leaders who are all of them thinking out of the box, who most of them are facing the same challenges, because you know the challenges I mentioned of a CEO that might have like some struggle with his board or with the shareholders, but probably this CEO is not the only one. And other CEOs, perhaps in a different continent, perhaps in the same continent, are experiencing also these challenges. So having them all sitting together in the same room, talking in depth about those challenges, how do they face them, what are the ways of showing the strength of this way of managing a financial institution, this is incredibly powerful. So I feel that the role of alliances, the global alliances, one example, but we have others. I think the role of alliances in order to push for this sort of different way of leading a financial institution is key. It really helps the leader, because otherwise the leader is too much alone. And yeah, and obviously you can always go to your National Bankers Association, because you will be sitting with you know, bankers and other financiers. But the big difference is that you will be sitting with other people who are probably very nice, by the way, but they all belong to the tribe. So they will give you, probably or not, they will give you some advice, they will make some reflections. But if you need reflections from a values-based perspective, if you need reflections from a mission-oriented sort of approach, if you need a reflection and a comment, a remark, a suggestion from a colleague that shares your values and your vision, you need to go somewhere else.
We started off this interview, dear Marcos, speaking about the moment in time that we are right now, facing COVID in different countries, facing more lockdown, etc. What we haven't spoken to so much about is the impact that that could be having on people's mental health, let alone potential physical health. And I'm even wondering if we can't take this opportunity to say this is a time when people at home might be more reflecting on what's really important for them, because they're surrounded more by their home surroundings and families at this moment in time. Could this be the opportunity to actually, through even collaborative Zoom calls, connect with people on what really matters at this moment in time, or even the mental health of their employee population, let alone, so then just taking this moment of crisis and using it as an opportunity for a rethink. And I'm going to pass back, unless you've got anything else you'd like to add to this, I was going to pass back to Andy and say thank you very much. I have really enjoyed this, but is there anything else you'd like to add that maybe I haven't asked?
No, I mean, well, no, thank you so much, Debbie. It's been a beautiful conversation. I've enjoyed pretty much. I would just say that, yeah, this is not a very nice moment in history. But if we look at it from a positive perspective, which is not easy, by the way, because especially for, you know, us Latin people, we are pretty passionate. We love to socialize and to go to the street and to give you a hug. By the way, I will give you a hug as soon as I see you in person, but if you allow me. It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to have those lockdowns, but we need to be positive. And being positive means that sooner or later, and I think it's going to be sooner rather than later, the virus will disappear. How? I don't know, but it will disappear. It's a matter of months. And we'll be back to something close to normal life. And it means that for a few months, perhaps a year, it's a matter of options. I mean, you can decide just to do nothing and keep, your normal life without getting deeper into dilemmas and your personal preference about life. Or you can perhaps use this sort of exceptional moments in life to think more in depth in what it is that you want to do with your life. And it's, of course, this is very appropriate for the younger people, but even for us who are, grown up already, I think that we still can do many more things. We still can shift things. And I agree with you, Debbie. I think it's a great moment for people to make a reflection. And as soon as things go back to normal, it's our time to put things in practice. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you, indeed. I really, really appreciated it.